Hi everyone, my name is Bill and I am from Smart About Money. We are part of Student Success here at UMass, and today I'm going to be talking about how to file your taxes in 2021. So this presentation is going to cover some of the basics about just filing your taxes in general, as well as specific things that have been passed, as well as specific statements that might have been sent out to you within the past year. Especially with the coronavirus pandemic, the tax laws, as well as some of the general filing guidelines have changed a little bit. So through that presentation, we'll address that, how to interpret different forms you might have received from your financial institutions, as well as your employer, what you might have received from your loan service providers if you have student loans, as well as what forms you might have received even from UMass. So we'll go ahead and get into this presentation. We'll talk a little bit about what you need to know just in general and some of the terminology you may encounter as you go through and file your taxes. And then we'll talk more specifically about the different forms that you will come across as you go ahead and file your taxes. So the first thing to notice is that there is a filing deadline. When you file your taxes every year, the deadline is traditionally April 15th. However, because of the coronavirus pandemic, the filing deadline has actually been pushed back until May 17th. So the IRS has given taxpayers an extra month. So you have a little bit more time to get ahead and file your taxes, but don't delay. And we'll talk a little bit more about that just because the process can take a little longer than you think. So on this slide, it just kind of talks about when the deadline is. Most of you are going to be filing a 1040 EZ. It's just a general 1040 form for most of us. And what we're going to talk about is our main tip is to leave yourself plenty of time to file. If this is your first time filing taxes, likely the software that you're using will not have all the information, such as your primary address, your information about just yourself, like your social security number, things like that. So you won't be able to import that if this is your first time filing. So leave yourself plenty of time because you might want to break it up if it just becomes too long for you to do in one sitting. And one other note is if you've recently filed your taxes and you might have made an error and you've already done most of these processes, you need to file what's called an amended return. It's used for omissions and errors. If you find yourself in the small category of having filed a return that is not totally correct and you maybe got a W-2 late or something like that, you can always file an amended return. So if you go through and you're realizing, ooh, I didn't do that, that's okay. You can always file an amended return with the IRS, and more information can be found on their website about that process. So we're going to jump into this slide, and this talks about the 2020 income tax rates. And one of the first things I just want to clarify here is when you go ahead and file in the year 2021, you're actually filing for the fiscal year 2020. And that date ranges from January 1st until December 31st of 2020. So a couple things to notice on this slide is the 2020 federal income tax amount for single filers. So most students will be single filers as they won't have any dependents or have a spouse. So if you are single and not married, you are a single filer. And these are the different tax rates. We have a progressive tax system, which breaks down the tax rate over different percentages. However, I just included two tax rates because most students aren't earning over $40,000 in college. So if you earn between 0 and $9,875, you'll pay about 10% in taxes. If the next rate over that, over $9,875, brings you into 12%. So we'll talk a little bit more about this and things that you can understand more about these tax rates. But a general note is if you live in Massachusetts, you have a flat tax rate of 5%. Depending on where your home state is, you will have to file a return in that state depending on if you've earned income there. But states have different income tax brackets. Some have no income tax, but Massachusetts does, and it's set at 5%. It's important to file a return if you've worked in general. Even if you've earned under $8,000, you should just file it as long as you've worked, because if you've paid taxes, you can likely get money back depending on how much you did earn. And that brings us to our next point, which is the standard deduction. The standard deduction at the federal level is $12,400. What this means is that your first $12,400 worth of income is not taxed. It's called what's the standard deduction. And the standard deduction applies to single filers as well as other groups, but most notably for our case, single filers. So if you earned $13,000, $12,400 of that would not be taxed under the standard deduction. And then the remainder of that would be taxed at your respective income level. And the standard deduction only applies at the federal level. States have different deductions, so we'll get a little bit more into that. But the main thing to know is that the standard deduction applies at the federal level in this case. And then we'll talk about independent versus dependent student eligibility and tax dependency. If you're an independent student or a dependent student, you may be filed as a dependent on your parents' tax return. Or you may be a dependent student and they don't claim you as a dependent on their tax return. So our biggest point here and takeaway is that you need to speak with your parental guardian before you go ahead and file your taxes to determine your dependency status. This is really important because this is one of the first things that will be asked after you enter all your personal information, is to determine what works best. And they will want to know, the software, whichever one you're using, whether you're a dependent, and that will kind of predict the rest of the information it asks you. So that's our first thing, is speak with the parental guardian about your dependency status in order to understand if you are dependent or if you're not. All right, so moving along, we are now going to talk more about what kind of different forms you'll need. As you go ahead and file your tax return, you'll need both your social security number and some basic information about where you're living, if you're a student, your dependency status, but then you'll also need a few different forms that were likely sent to you in the mail. So the first thing is your social security number, like we talked about, and then your W-2. So if you held a job throughout 2020, and you met certain requirements, you'll be receiving a W-2 from your employer. This was sent out January 31st, 2021 at the latest. Employers might have sent them through the mail, or they might have sent them actually through whatever online portal you use. So it's important to look into that to make sure that you locate your W-2, because you'll need that before you file. All right, next is just the time. So you need to block out about an hour. If you haven't done your taxes before, I'd say this might take a little bit more time just to enter all your information. But generally, on average, it takes about an hour, just depending on how much income you earned and what kind of W-2s you have, and how much other additional forms you may have to enter. And then just information about your health insurance, dependency status, and then parental information depending on your circumstances. Then we get into these additional forms. We'll talk about all these 1099s or 1098s. Later in the presentation, we'll break them down and understand what they mean. But they're just additional forms that are sent out for various reasons, either from financial institution, loans providers, or even UMass. All right, so the next thing is your W-2. So we're going to talk about breaking down your W-2 and understanding what the W-2 actually means. So the W-2 is a document sent by your employer that just states the amount of income you made, the taxes they withheld, and other related information. If you notice that you might have filled something out prior to your employment, that's called the W-4, and that's used to make adjustments about your tax withholding as well as other personal information changes. So they won't be sending you the W-4, they'll be sending you the W-2. So as you can see, we have some arrows here. So wages and tips is probably the most common thing you'll see. It's definitely going to be on there if you worked. It will state how much you earned, as well as box 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6 will likely be filled out. It just talks about Social Security that might have been paid, as well as federal income tax and state income tax that was withheld further down here. The employer ID number, they'll ask for that as you enter your employer's information. That can be found right down here on your W-2, and then their not billing information, but their information where they're registered. So you'll enter all that when it comes to time. So you'll need about box 1 through 6 and 15, which talks about which state it is in, and then some of the state wages as well as the income tax that you might have already paid. And this is all determined based on how you've chose to have your taxes withheld. All right, cool. So the next thing we're going to talk about is the 1098-T. So the 1098-T is a form that shows a breakdown of all educational institution related payments received and payments due from the paying student. you can actually get this form on Spire. This is the form that UMass sends out, the 1098T, and it just talks about, it will show in box 1, which is right here. You can always tell the box number just by the number out in the left top hand corner. And it talks about the payments received for qualified tuition and related expenses. So making payments such as room and board, as well as towards your tuition, that goes up in that box. And then the scholarships and grants go down here, and any adjustments that needed to be made. This form is most commonly used if you're a dependent for your parents. You'll give this form to them and they'll put it on their tax. However, if you're independent, both in the tax sense or as an independent student for financial aid related reasons and you're not claimed as a dependent, you may put this form on your own taxes. It's just key to check in with your parents and see who's going to be claiming this form. It will likely be your parents if you're a dependent student. All right, so moving along, we're going to get into another common form, and this one's related to your bank. This is called the 1099 INT. So if some of you have a money market account or a high yield savings account, you'll get what's called a 1099 INT that's sent to you from your bank. This happens if you've accumulated more than $10 in interest on that account, and it will just show the income interest that is earned you had in the account. So whatever the interest was earned, it will show that, and then that will be taxed. All right, so now we get into the 1098E. So the 1098E is sent to you by your loan servicer if you have interest in excess of $600. Now, something important to remember is that this is not UMass. The 1098E is sent to you through your loan service provider. So this can be sent either electronically or through the postal service to the address they have on file, depending on your mailing preferences. And something important to know is if you don't know who your loan service provider is and you do have loans, feel free to set up a one-on-one appointment with one of the peer financial coaches, such as myself at Smart About Money at UMass. You can make this appointment through Navigate, and we can help you locate some of the information you'll need to find your loan service provider, because your loan service provider is not UMass, so they won't send you the 1098E. It will be your loan service provider, and this is only if you've accrued in excess of $600 in interest and paid that interest. So it just says student loan interest received by lender. So that would be the box that you'd see on the 1098E. So some of you won't be getting it because you haven't paid in excess of $600 in interest, but for those that may have, you will be getting this form. All right, so then we get in the 1099 MISC, the 1099 Miscellaneous. So the 1099 Miscellaneous is a form that is used to claim additional forms of income. This might be your situation if your employer has you as either an independent contractor, a seasonal employee, or some other categorization. If you worked an internship too, you might get a 1099 Miscellaneous. It just depends on what their preferences are and how they've done it. So you can always speak to someone in the HR department to see if you thought, hey, I should be getting a W-2, but you got a 1099. It might just be the way that they claim you on their taxes and how they pay you. Additionally, if you have a Robinhood account, most commonly, a lot of college students have Robinhood accounts, you'll get a 1099. This information will have to be put into your income calculation. Whatever software you're using will do that. You just have to enter some of the box information that it will ask for. And additionally, if you drove for companies such as Lyft, Uber, or worked for Instacart, that may also be how they send you your 1099. So you can go ahead and put that into your income calculation as you work through the program. And then additionally, if you own cryptocurrency, you'll also need to disclose that when you're filing during 2020. The IRS has gotten pretty strict about that. That's actually one of the first questions as you go through your income calculation that they'll ask you about. So make sure that you pay attention to forms that were sent to you, or look on your online inboxes to locate those kind of forms because they'll definitely be asking for them. And a common question we get is, I did not receive a 1099, but I worked a gig economy job. And a gig economy job just means something like Lyft or Uber or Instacart. You know, you kind of picked it up when you wanted to and put it down when you didn't. So if you did not earn over $600, then they're not required to send you the form. And Instacart sends a 1099 NEC. Don't be confused by all these terms. They're just ways for them to show like non-employee compensation. So something that you're not a direct employee, you're more of a contract worker. This income still reported to the IRS on their end, so you need to include it in your income calculation as well. All right, so then we're going to get into unemployment. So unfortunately, a lot of us might have been on unemployment because of the coronavirus pandemic. So if you received unemployment benefits this year, you're going to be receiving the 1099-G. And this is either mailed to you through the Massachusetts or state unemployment office, or it's found online. And through the 1099, it will show how much income you received, what taxes were withheld, and you'll upload that either under the unemployment section or the income section, depending on the software you use. It will have a separate designation for unemployment. Withholdings, so if you see that you didn't have any income tax withheld at the federal or state level, that's likely because you didn't elect for that. Otherwise, it might have just defaulted and taken out taxes, and you can use that towards possibly getting a refund. So here's an important note. Under the American Rescue Plan of 2021, the stimulus package that was most recently passed in Congress, there's a $10,200 exclusion for unemployment income. What does this mean? It just means that if you earned $6,000 in income from unemployment, traditionally you're going to have to pay taxes. Unemployment is taxable income. However, under this exclusion, those who earned unemployment income, they get a $10,200 exclusion. So if you earned $11,000, $10,200 of that won't be taxed. The rest will be under your respective income tax rate, but $10,200 won't be. So if you earned less than $10,200, you won't have to pay taxes on that either. All right. So the next thing we're going to look at is stimulus checks. So a lot of us might have received stimulus checks, or a lot might not have. It just depends. If you're dependent on your parental tax forms, then you wouldn't receive a stimulus check. If you're not, and you're an independent, then you will receive a stimulus check. And you can always go to the IRS website and check in and see the status of your stimulus check. So these were received during 2020 and 2021, but we're looking at 2020 right now for the tax year, and they're 100% tax-free. So this is great news because it doesn't go to put your taxable income higher. So you won't owe any taxes on stimulus checks, which is excellent. If you did not receive a check, but you were eligible based on the IRS's guidelines, you may be able to use that as a credit on your taxes if you owe money. And we'll get into owing money a little bit later, but just know that if you were supposed to receive a stimulus check and you didn't, you can possibly use it as a credit to pay some of the taxes you owe and then possibly get the rest back, just depending on your situation. All right, so then the next thing is internships, and this is important. So if you had an internship this summer and they paid for your housing and possibly your travel and some other things, you will likely be taxed for this. A lot of companies will pay the cost of this, but they'll count it as your income. So if you worked a summer job and you made $10,000, but you see that your earnings were $20,000, you think, where did that extra money come from? You can always speak to someone in the HR department to figure out exactly what the breakdown of this is, but most likely the answer is that you were provided housing or travel, relocation, or something like that, and you get taxed on that income. They've paid for it, but you still have to pay taxes on it. So you just need to understand the tax ramifications of that. And what that means is that you're liable for the taxes. So speak again with someone in HR, look in your contract or offer letter to see specifics about this, but just be aware that if you have a higher income than what you might have earned, it could possibly be because you had housing or relocation tacked on to your internship or job. All right, so then we're going to talk about one return, two return, possibly even three returns. This has to do with living and working in multiple different states and earning income in those different states. So if you're living and working in different states, multiple locations, you possibly have to file different returns. So this is just a quote from the online website of the IRS. Taxation depends on the physical location where you report to work. It doesn't matter if your employer's business is headquartered elsewhere, as long as you don't commute to that location for work. So for example, if you worked in Massachusetts and California, you need to file two different returns. It ends up coming out to three because you file a federal return and then a state return. However, in this case, you've worked and lived in two different states, so you need to file 3 different returns. So a federal return, a Massachusetts return, and a California return. So you only report the income that's earned in that state. And then there's also this thing called tax reciprocity. If you worked in multiple states, it doesn't hurt to look this up. You can just Google it and look it up on either the IRS website or a website called like NerdWallet or The Balance. It will talk about tax reciprocity. And just the baseline is that if you earned income in one state and it has an agreement with another state, you wouldn't have to pay income tax on some of that income, just depending on their agreement. But generally, you'll have to pay state income tax on the Massachusetts income and then state income tax on the California income or whatever other state you live in, as long as you've earned it in that state. All right, so this is a common question we get and a valid question. Where do I file my taxes? I hear a lot about, well, I need to file my taxes, but I don't really know where that takes place. It's a great question, and we'll talk a little bit more about it. So when you file your taxes, the important thing to know is that you likely qualify for free tax service. This means you don't have to pay someone to do your taxes. And if you feel up to the challenge, you likely should just do it on your own because it's really not a hard task. Like I said, it takes about an hour. And most of the information on these softwares is super simple. A lot of us here at Smart About Money use these free services, as well as a lot of students we know on campus. H&R Block, TurboTax, Tax Act, Free Tax USA, 1040 Now, Irs Free File. These are all free services. So as long as you earned under the income limit set by each of these, which can be upwards of $78,000, you qualify to have a free tax return, especially being a college student. So the IRS Free File program, you can Google IRS Free File, and it will show you all these approved vendors that offer free tax service. So what this just means is that you can use their software for free and go ahead and file. And this doesn't mean you have to go to the store and buy the actual software and download it onto your computer. This just means you can go to turbotax.com or hnrblock.com, and from there you can go ahead and go through all the steps, fill your taxes, and they'll send the tax return on your behalf. So it's pretty great, especially because you don't have to pay. All right, so these are some of the helpful resources. If you've gone through this presentation and you're a little bit confused, it's totally okay. This takes a lot of time to understand. So there's a few different resources that we've all used and we think are a great resource for you. And the first one is the Wall Street Journal Tax Guide of 2021. If you have a subscription or are interested in a student subscription, I definitely recommend it personally. It's great just to read the news, but they also have a tax guide. And this talks about all different kinds of circumstances and breaking down the new tax laws. The New York Times, you get a free subscription if you're a UMass student, so talk to the library about that. But they have a thing on income tax, and they talk about the different types of income taxes in different states and some of the ramifications based on different years. So they have a blog on that. The Voluntary Income Tax Assistance Program. That's through the IRS. It's called VITA. There are programs out here in the Amherst area that work with VITA to help people file their taxes, as well as Smart About Money. We're happy to meet with you and talk about general specifics about where to file your taxes, how to understand some of the forms you may have given a little bit more in depth in this presentation. The Balance is a good website. It talks just about unbiased general tax information if you look up the different topic. And then the IRS website. The IRS website is a wealth of knowledge, even though you might think, oh, it's a government website, like what information does it really have? It might be hard to use. It's not. It has really good bullet points and really quick snippets about different tax information you might need to know and different things you might encounter. So I definitely recommend hitting up the IRS website just because it's pretty simple to use. It has a lot of good information and it's presented in a really easy way to look at. So we just have some closing remarks here. These are just some tips and good practice guidelines to go by. And the first one is prepare before you actually file. So before you sit down on your computer and you use free software that we talked about, prepare. So try to locate some of those forms. Go back and look at the different forms that you might have gotten and look at and know the different forms that you're going to need beforehand. When all else fails, just gather all the forms that might have been sent to you and see if you need to enter them. It's best to have more forms and not need them than try to hunt down all these different forms and break up your filing process so that you don't get it all done in one sitting or you're disorganized. So Speak to a parent or guardian again, like we said. We're reiterating that about your dependency status, and then read about topics you may be confused about and understand your own financial situation. Set up a one-on-one coaching appointment with Sam to talk about it if you're comfortable. And then if you need advanced help, always reach out to a licensed professional. If your situation is a little bit more complex, reach out to a licensed professional for any questions that you're not able to answer on your own. All right, and then tips and good practices continued. So if you make charitable contributions and donations, make sure to keep the receipts, especially when you're older. You'll be able to itemize these and put them on your taxes. So stay organized, like we said, make a spreadsheet, filing system, and then use free services like H&R Block, TurboTax, Free File, 1040, Easy File through the IRS website. And then always print and download your return. This is something not a lot of people think about, but most of these free services file your return for you, both the federal and state return, for free. But then if you want to get access to it a year later, you have to pay. So always keep a copy in a safe and secure place. So that way, if you ever need to look back on it, especially for the FAFSA, then you already have that information. And then after you file, make sure you get confirmations. You can sign up for text and email confirmations through the services that you file, and keep an eye on when it's accepted. Also track your return and make sure you actually receive it. You can go to IRS, the IRS website, and see Track My Return. And from there, you enter some information, your return amount, and it shows you exactly when it's supposed to hit your account, which is really helpful. So make sure you figure out, when the return is actually accepted. You'll get confirmation emails, and also track your return to make sure that you actually receive it. So here are some resource links. So the different kinds of payments that you can pay the IRS with if you do owe taxes by check or money order, or using your account and routing number. And then your check refund status, which is what we talked about, which is really helpful. And then the Irs Free File website. So feel free to copy and paste these, look them up just by name. It will show you the different kinds of information that you'll need in order to get your taxes done and in on time. All right, so I just want to say thank you to everyone that watched. We appreciate your time. Again, if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to us. Our email is down in the left-hand corner. You can find us on campus in a non-COVID world when we're actually on campus, but in the virtual environment, we are doing virtual one-on-one appointments as well as presentations such like this. So feel free to reach out and see how you can keep in touch. Again, hit us up on Instagram, Twitter, or Facebook to figure out what kind of events and presentations we have upcoming, and more information about how to file an appointment. Again, so I thank you for watching this tax presentation. I hope this answered most of your questions. And if you have any other further questions, feel free to make a one-on-one appointment, or just do some research. Thanks.